Why did the room go quiet when she walked in, as if everyone suddenly felt watched by something they couldn't name? The dining hall was loud before she arrived. Too loud. Forks clattering, boots scraping tile, voices stacked on top of one another in careless layers. 1,000 soldiers, relaxed in the one place they allowed themselves to loosen their guard. Then she stepped through the doors and the noise didn't stop, but it shifted, like static adjusting its frequency. Anna Sharma didn't notice the change, or if she did, she didn't show it. She moved with economy. No wasted steps, no searching eyes. Her tray was already balanced in her left hand, her posture straight but unremarkable. At first glance, she looked like someone who belonged on the edges of things, someone technical, administrative, easy to dismiss. That was the mistake. She sat alone at a corner table, back straight, shoulders relaxed, gaze lowered to her meal. Chicken, broccoli, water, fuel, not comfort. Across the room, 2 soldiers watched her with the kind of attention that wasn't curiosity, it was hunger. The bored kind. The kind that feeds on tearing something down just to feel alive. "She's it," one of them muttered, loud enough to travel. "Has to be a joke," the other replied. "They send her to teach us war." Laughter followed, not sharp, not cruel enough to stop everything, just enough to spread. Anna didn't look up. Inside, something registered. Not anger, not fear, data, tone, intent. She logged it the same way she logged signal anomalies or system delays, time, location, personnel, escalation probability. She had learned long ago that emotions were expensive, awareness was cheaper. The comments continued, grew bolder. Someone mimicked her posture. Someone suggested she'd cry if shouted at. When she stood to leave, a boot slid casually into her path. A test. A challenge dressed as a joke. She adjusted her stride by inches and walked past without breaking rhythm. That hurt them more than confrontation ever could. Outside, sunlight hit her face like a reset. She breathed once, slow, measured, then kept walking. What they didn't see was the moment she decided something had shifted. Not today, not publicly, but soon. Because silence wasn't surrender, it was preparation. That night, while laughter echoed in barracks halls and phones lit up with crude jokes and shared images, Anna sat alone in a small, sterile room and wrote everything down. No adjectives, no emotion, just facts. She saved the file, encrypted it, time-stamped it. Documentation before reaction. Tomorrow would bring the field, 1,000 witnesses, and people who mistook restraint for weakness were about to learn the cost of misreading quiet. What kind of woman trains for violence without ever looking angry? The gym was empty when she arrived. The loud men stayed in the weight room, chasing exhaustion and ego. Anna walked past them without a glance, into the matted room at the back where mirrors had been removed and silence was respected. She didn't warm up like others did. No shadowboxing, no aggressive breaths. She moved slowly at first, testing joints, aligning posture. Then the rhythm changed. Flow replaced force. Redirection replaced impact. Her training wasn't about overpowering anyone. It never had been. It was about understanding structure, where it failed, where it resisted, where momentum betrayed intention. Bodies were systems, predictable if you knew how to listen. As she practiced, her mind replayed the day before, not the insults, the pattern. She had seen it before. Different bases, different uniforms, same disbelief, same escalation. Men who believed strength had to announce itself. Men who felt threatened by what they didn't understand. She wasn't angry at them. Anger required attachment. She felt something colder, responsibility. Tomorrow's exercise mattered. The system she'd built, years of her life condensed into code and logic, required trust, and trust wouldn't survive contempt. Outside the gym, somewhere unseen, images were being shared. Her face froze in mid-blink, captions mocking her size, bets placed on her breaking under pressure, every click, every laugh quietly documenting intent. She finished her session and left without ceremony. That night she slept deeply. Why did the laughter die the moment she stepped onto the field? The sun hung low over Miller Field, bleaching the earth and turning helmets into mirrors. 1,000 soldiers stood in formation, restless energy vibrating through them. This was familiar ground, physical, honest, where hierarchy was proven with sweat. Master Sergeant Vance's voice cut through the air like a blade. Old school, respected, dangerous in the way men become when they've survived too much. Anna stood at the edge, hands behind her back, wearing standard PT gear. No armor, no weapon, just fabric and bone. When her name was called, the murmur spread instantly. This wasn't scheduled, this wasn't expected. She walked forward, each step deliberate. She felt eyes on her, some amused, some curious, some sharp with anticipation. Across from her, the two soldiers stepped in, circling, smiling, performing. They spoke to her like she wasn't there, like she was an object, a prop. Then one of them said it. "Bend over." The words hit the field like a dropped plate. Laughter burst out before people could stop themselves. Somewhere in the stands, anger flared. Authority prepared to intervene. But Anna didn't move. Inside her chest, her heart rate rose exactly as expected. Her body warmed, systems online. When they lunged, it wasn't chaos, it was confirmation. She stepped into them. What followed wasn't violent, it was precise. 7 seconds of anatomy meeting physics, momentum redirected, joints taken past tolerance, soundless until it was. Two men hit the ground screaming. Anna stood between them, breathing steady, eyes clear. 1,000 soldiers stared at something they didn't have language for. Not dominance. Competence. What does it cost to be right when everyone expected you to break? The silence afterward was heavier than noise. Medics rushed in. Authority closed ranks. Anna was escorted away without resistance. She waited alone, calm. Hours passed, evidence spoke. Video didn't lie, reports aligned, social media confessed. When she stood before the commander, she didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. Truth did the work. Apologies were offered, careers ended, consequences landed where they belonged. But what stayed with her wasn't victory. It was exhaustion. Being underestimated wasn't new. Being proven right never felt as good as people imagined. When the Ranger patch was offered, she accepted it quietly. Respect earned without spectacle meant more than applause ever could. Why did an entire hallway stop when she walked through it? They saluted her, not because they had to, because something in them had shifted. That afternoon her system came alive. Data flowed. Soldiers moved smarter. Threats dissolved before contact. War made cleaner, fewer lives spent. She watched without pride, only focus. Later, alone again, she closed the final report, marked it resolved. Another message waited, another mission. She picked up her patch, the phoenix, faith in the antenna. Restraint wasn't weakness. Silence wasn't fear. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What kind of woman prepares for violence without ever looking angry? The gym lights hummed softly above her, the sound barely noticeable unless you listened for it. Anna Sharma did. She always listened. To rooms, to systems, to her own breath. The mat beneath her feet was worn thin by years of bodies slamming into it with ambition and ego, but tonight it belonged to her alone. She stood still at the center for a long moment, eyes half-lidded, hands resting loosely at her sides. Anyone watching might have thought she was hesitating, or nervous, or unsure of herself. They would have been wrong. Inside her mind she was already moving, cataloging joints, angles, the physics of mass and momentum, not faces, not insults. Structure didn't care about disrespect. Structure only cared about force applied incorrectly. She stepped forward and began. Her movements were slow at first, almost gentle, A pivot of the hips, a roll of the shoulders, a shift of weight from heel to toe. She wasn't practicing strikes. She was calibrating balance, feeling where gravity wanted to take her and deciding deliberately not to follow. This was the part no one ever understood. Violence, when done correctly, wasn't emotional. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, intimate, mathematical. She moved into a flowing sequence, arms tracing arcs through empty air, fingers opening and closing as if shaping something invisible. Each motion ended exactly where it needed to. No flourish, no wasted energy. Her breathing remained steady. In another building across the base, laughter erupted over glowing screens. Someone had uploaded a photo of her from the dining facility, mid-step, unaware, captioned with cruelty disguised as humor, comments stacked beneath it, jokes, bets, predictions of her breaking. Anna didn't see any of it, but she felt the pattern. She had felt it before, years ago during her first overseas deployment. Different men, same looks, same tone that said you don't belong here but will tolerate you if you stay small. She remembered the anxiety then, the tight chest, the urge to speak up too quickly to prove something. She didn't feel that now. What she felt instead was resolve, quiet, unshakable. She transitioned into partner drills without a partner, visualizing weight against her frame, imagining resistance where there was none. Her hands moved to wrists, elbows, shoulders, not gripping, guiding, not stopping, redirecting. Her system favored minimal force, maximum control, injure only what must be injured, disable, don't destroy. It was the same philosophy she'd used designing Oracle. War didn't have to be loud to be lethal. Precision mattered. Information mattered. Knowing when not to strike mattered most of all. She finished with a final sequence and stood still again, heart rate elevated but controlled. Sweat dampened her collar. She wiped her hands on her shirt and looked at herself in the mirrorless wall. No anger stared back at her. Only readiness. Later in her room, she reviewed the next day's schedule. The combatives refresher jumped out immediately. Full battalion. Demonstration team already assigned. The names made her pause. She didn't react outwardly. Inside, calculations began. Probability trees, escalation models. The behavior she'd observed rarely de-escalated on its own, especially not in front of peers, especially not when humiliation had already been rehearsed. She closed the schedule and opened her secure files. The report from the dining facility incident was there, clean and clinical. She read it once more, ensuring nothing was missing. Witnesses named. Actions logged. This wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. She lay down and turned off the light. Sleep came easily. Why do predators mistake calm for weakness? Morning arrived with heat and dust, the kind that stuck to skin and made tempers short. Miller Field stretched wide under the sky, already filling with bodies. Lines tightened. Commands echoed. Boots hit earth in perfect rhythm. Anna arrived early and took her place near the bleachers. She wasn't hidden. She wasn't centered. She was exactly where she'd been told to stand. From her position, she could see everything. She watched the soldiers as individuals, not a mass, who fidgeted, who overcompensated, who tried to look larger than they were. She saw insecurity masked as bravado, confidence built on volume instead of competence. She also saw discipline, skill, potential. The demonstration team stepped forward when called. Drake and Rooker moved like men comfortable being watched. They fed off attention. Their bodies were loud even when they stood still. Anna noted how they glanced at her, brief, assessing, smiling. They thought this was theater. The drills began, knife defenses, choke escapes, weapon retention. The crowd responded the way crowds always did, approval when things looked aggressive, bored when technique became subtle. Anna remained still. Her mind wasn't on them. It was on timing, on space, on how long it took authority to intervene once a line was crossed, on how much damage could be done in the gap between command and action. She didn't want a moment. She wanted finality. When her name was called, the shift was immediate. The air tightened. Conversations died mid-word. She could feel expectation leaning forward, hungry. She walked onto the field without haste. Standing there, she felt the weight of eyes, 1,000 judgments layered over her like static. She felt small physically. She acknowledged it. Size was data, not destiny. The instructions were given. She listened closely. Unarmed asset, opposition to subdue, non-lethal. She agreed internally. Non-lethal was always preferable. Drake spoke first, projecting confidence, milking the moment. Rooker followed, crossing the line not by accident but by choice. When the words left his mouth, Anna felt something settle inside her. Not rage. Permission. They lunged together exactly as predicted, high and low, overwhelmed through mass and speed. Anna stepped forward. Time compressed. Her hand met Drake's wrist with precision, fingers finding the nerve cluster without searching. Her body pivoted, placing her where she needed to be before his mind caught up to his momentum. His shoulder took the load, failed. She released him as he fell, already turning. Rooker never saw her shift. His tackle met absence. Her grip found his elbow and neck in the same instant. His roll was inevitable. The joint gave with a sound that carried. 7 seconds. She stood between them, breathing steady, scanning for secondary threats that never came. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full of shock, of recalibration, of something breaking that had needed breaking for a long time. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't speak. She waited. What happens when the story you tell yourself collapses in front of witnesses? Anna walked away from the field under escort, but she felt no fear. Fear lived in uncertainty. This was clarity. She sat in the small office they placed her in, hands folded, posture relaxed. She didn't replay the moment. There was nothing to analyze. The outcome had matched the model. Hours passed. She noticed the hum of the air vent, the slight flicker of the light. She thought about the first time she'd been ignored in a briefing room years ago, how small it had made her feel, how hard she'd worked afterward not to be louder, but to be better. The door eventually opened, procedures unfolded, questions asked. She answered simply. Truth had weight. And weight, when applied correctly, always landed where it should. She closed her eyes briefly and waited for what came next, knowing whatever it was, she had already done the hardest part. She had remained herself. And that, more than anything, was why the system held. What does it feel like to sit alone, while an entire institution decides who you are? The room was smaller than she expected. Bare walls, one metal desk, 2 chairs she didn't use. Anna Sharma remained standing at first, then slowly sat when the silence began to feel intentional, like a test of patience rather than procedure. She passed it easily. Time had never intimidated her. Systems ran on it. Decisions matured inside it. Panic belonged to people who didn't understand how long things actually took. Outside the room, Miller Field was still buzzing with aftershock. Medics moved fast. Officers spoke in clipped tones. Rumors already mutated, stretching the truth into shapes more dramatic than reality. Some said she'd broken bones. Others said she'd trained with foreign special forces. A few insisted it was staged. Anna knew better. Truth didn't care what people needed to believe. She sat with her hands folded loosely in her lap, back straight, eyes unfocused, not withdrawn, simply present. Her breathing had returned to baseline minutes ago, adrenaline spent, muscles loose again, no tremor, no replay loop. That was the part people found unsettling later, not what she did, but how quickly she returned to calm. A younger version of herself might have shaken now, might have questioned whether she'd gone too far, whether restraint would be misinterpreted as guilt. But experience had taught her something essential. If you acted within your principles, doubt was wasted energy. She reviewed the moment once clinically. The insult, the synchronized lunge, the force applied, the injury sustained. Minimal, controlled, necessary. She'd done exactly what she'd been trained to do. The door opened without ceremony. Captain Rostova stepped in, face composed but tight around the eyes. She didn't sit either. Authority hovered in her posture, but concern slipped through the cracks. "Chief," she said quietly, "you're not in trouble, but you are under administrative restriction until the inquiry concludes." Anna nodded once, no reaction beyond that. Rostova hesitated, then added, "You should know the footage is clear." "I expected it would be," Anna replied. That was all. When the captain left, Anna was alone again. She leaned back slightly and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere above her, the base continued functioning. Radios crackled, boots moved, orders were given and obeyed. Systems absorbed shocks and adjusted. She smiled faintly just once, not with satisfaction, with recognition. The system was working. Why do some truths need witnesses before they're believed? Colonel Marcus Thorne watched the footage in silence, once, then again, then a third time from a different angle. He didn't blink. 30 years of command had taught him to recognize chaos, discipline, and something rarer, competence so clean it exposed everything around it as noise. He paused the video just as Drake's shoulder gave out. 7 seconds. "That's not excessive force," he said flatly. The JAG officer beside him nodded. "No, sir, it's textbook neutralization. If anything, it's restrained." Thorne exhaled slowly. His jaw tightened, not with anger toward Anna Sharma, but toward himself. Because this hadn't started on the field. It had started in culture, in jokes allowed to breathe, in disrespect uncorrected, in assuming the loudest men were the strongest because no one challenged the assumption. He ordered the next files opened. The DFAC report appeared on screen, time-stamped, clinical, precise. Anna Sharma hadn't reacted then either. She documented. The social media posts came next. Screenshots, comments, timestamps, laughing emojis fossilized into evidence. Each line a small confession. By the time Drake and Rooker were called in, the outcome was already written. They walked in confident, walked out hollow. Denial cracked quickly when faced with footage of their own words echoing across Miller Field. Excuses followed, jokes reframed as misunderstandings, blame redirected. None of it mattered. Consequences, when delayed, didn't weaken, they sharpened. What happens when respect arrives too late to stop the damage, but not too late to matter? Anna was called to the commander's office 2 days later. She walked the hallway calmly, passing soldiers who stopped talking as she approached. Some stared, some looked away. A few nodded, uncertain whether permission had been granted for that yet. She didn't take any of it personally. Reputation was another system. It lagged behind reality. Colonel Thorne stood when she entered. That alone told her everything. He didn't waste time. He apologized. Not quickly, not defensively, but fully, naming the failures, naming the disgrace, owning the blind spots. Anna listened without interruption. When he slid the disciplinary file across the desk, she didn't reach for it. She already knew what it contained. Rank reductions, reassignments, careers rerouted far from the identity they'd tried to protect through cruelty. She felt no triumph, only closure. Then Master Sergeant Vance stepped forward. He held a patch in his hand. Anna recognized it instantly. "Ranger." "This isn't protocol," Vance said, voice lower than usual. "But neither was what you showed my soldiers." He paused, eyes steady on hers. They needed to see that strength doesn't announce itself. Anna accepted the patch with a small nod. "Thank you, Master Sergeant." It was enough. Why did silence fall in the hallway when she walked out? She didn't notice at first. Then she heard boots stop, felt the shift. A salute snapped up, then another. Not loud, not dramatic. Precise. She returned the salute automatically, muscle memory perfect, rank acknowledged, respect returned. As she continued walking, she felt something unfamiliar settle over her. Not pride. Relief. She hadn't wanted recognition, she'd wanted correction. And it had come. What does redemption look like when it isn't loud? That afternoon, Anna stood overlooking the range as Oracle came fully online. Data streams converged. Icons moved. Threats dissolved before contact. Colonel Thorne watched in awe. Vance watched with quiet humility. Anna explained calmly, pointing out signal overlaps, predictive alerts, margins of safety. No one interrupted her. They listened, because now they understood something fundamental. Competence didn't need permission. It simply waited. And when it acted, it changed everything. What happens after the moment everyone remembers, when the noise fades and you're left alone with what it cost? The range emptied slowly like a held breath finally released. Engines started. Radios chirped. Boots moved again with purpose instead of shock. From a distance, it might have looked like any other successful training day. Inside Anna Sharma, something heavier settled. She stood on the hill longer than necessary, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the mock village below. Oracle's holographic overlay had already been shut down, the glowing icons gone, the battlefield returned to dust and plywood. But her mind kept the image alive. The precision, the efficiency, the way things worked when people stopped letting ego interfere. Behind her, officers spoke in quieter voices now, respectful voices, voices that measured their words. She didn't turn around. Because this was the part no one warned you about, the aftermath of being seen, of having your silence interrupted by spectacle, of knowing that a single moment had redefined how an entire institution perceived you. She had wanted trust in the system. She hadn't wanted legend. Captain Rostova joined her on the hill, stopping a careful distance away. "They're talking about it everywhere," she said softly. "Not the incident, you." Anna nodded. "They will for a while." "And that doesn't bother you?" Anna considered the question honestly. "It complicates things." That was the truth. Attention distorted. It bent expectations. It replaced skepticism with something just as dangerous: assumption. That because she had done this one thing, she could do everything. People loved simple narratives. Anna had learned to be wary of them. That night, alone again in her quarters, she removed the ranger patch from her pocket and placed it beside her own. Two symbols, two identities temporarily overlapping. She stared at them longer than she expected. She remembered her father's voice from years ago, quiet and steady, telling her that respect earned through noise rarely lasted. Respect earned through consistency did. Consistency was harder. She powered on her laptop and dove back into work. Because systems didn't care about stories. Why does trust feel heavier than doubt once you finally receive it? The next morning, the command tent was full. Not crowded, attentive. Chairs arranged closer. Screens angled toward her instead of away. When Anna spoke, people leaned in instead of interrupting. She briefed calmly. No embellishment, no references to the incident, just data. Latency reduced by 12%. Signal overlap resolved. Predictive alerts validated in live conditions. Soldier feedback positive, if cautiously so. When she finished, silence followed. Then questions came, real ones, thoughtful ones. What happens in signal-denied environments? How resilient is the system under electronic attack? What's the failure cascade look like if a node drops? Anna answered each without defensiveness, without triumph. This was the work, this was what mattered. After the briefing, a young sergeant approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said, eyes fixed somewhere near her shoulder. "About yesterday." Anna waited. "I've got a sister," he continued. "She's thinking about enlisting. I didn't think someone like you could exist here." She studied him for a moment, saw sincerity, not flattery. "Now you know," she said simply. He nodded, as if something had quietly realigned inside him, and walked away. Anna felt a small ache in her chest, not pride, something closer to responsibility. Why do old wounds reopen when you think you've finally moved past them? That afternoon, as she worked alone in the SCIF, a memory surfaced uninvited. Another base, years earlier, another briefing room where her recommendation had been ignored until a male officer repeated it verbatim 10 minutes later and received praise. She remembered how she'd swallowed the anger then, how she'd told herself it didn't matter. But it had. It had taught her to disappear just enough to survive. Now people wanted her visible. The contradiction weighed on her. She paused her work and closed her eyes briefly, let the memory pass without fighting it. Fighting gave it power. She reopened her eyes and continued typing. Because resilience wasn't about pretending you weren't affected. It was about choosing not to be ruled by it. What does leadership look like when it's quiet? On the final day of the exercise, Anna walked through the platoons as they prepared to deploy with Oracle fully integrated. Soldiers adjusted gear, checked displays, murmured to one another. Some looked at her openly now, curious, respectful, a few smiled. One of the older NCOs approached her. His posture was rigid, formal. "Chief," he said, "permission to speak freely." "Granted." "I've been doing this a long time," he said. "I didn't think I needed what you built." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was wrong." Anna inclined her head. "Thank you for saying so." He nodded once, as if that single exchange closed a loop he'd been carrying for years. As the platoons moved out, Anna watched them go with a strange mix of pride and distance. She wasn't leading them into danger. She wasn't beside them in the dust. But she was with them. In every signal that warned them early. In every alert that kept them alive. Invisible leadership. The kind that rarely made headlines. Why does peace sometimes feel anticlimactic after conflict? That evening, Anna packed her things. Not much, she'd never needed much. Her room returned quickly to its original state, sterile, anonymous. Before leaving, she opened her secure digital locker one last time and reviewed the file marked Miller Field incident. She added a final note. Outcome: institutional correction achieved. No further action required. She marked it resolved. As she closed the laptop, a new message arrived. Orders, another assignment, another problem waiting to be solved somewhere far from here. She exhaled slowly. The work continued. As she stepped out into the night, the base lights stretching endlessly ahead, Anna felt neither victorious nor wronged. She felt whole. Because she hadn't changed herself to be accepted. She had simply remained. And in doing so, she had forced the world around her to adjust. Sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it endures. And that endurance reshapes everything. Why does the hardest battle arrive only after everyone believes you've already won? The aircraft lifted off just before dawn, its engines cutting through the dark with a low, steady force that felt almost calming. Anna Sharma sat strapped into her seat, hands resting loosely in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The base lights below grew smaller, then scattered, then vanished entirely beneath the clouds. Fort Bridger was already receding into memory. That was how it always happened. One place became a story the moment you left it. People stayed behind with their interpretations, their lessons, their rumors. You moved on with the weight of what had happened pressed quietly into your chest. Across the aisle, a junior officer reviewed briefing notes on a tablet, glancing up at Anna more than once. Each time he stopped himself from speaking. Respect, she realized, often manifested as hesitation. She closed her eyes briefly, not to sleep but to settle. The past week replayed in fragments. The dining hall laughter, the 7 seconds on the field, the salutes in the hallway. None of it followed a clean emotional arc. There was no triumphant rise, no victorious resolution. Just consequence. The new orders had been clear. A carrier strike group operating in contested waters was experiencing escalating electronic interference. Ghost signals, phantom pings, communications degrading in patterns that didn't match known adversaries. They needed someone who understood systems that lied. They needed her. As the aircraft droned on, Anna felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear but separation. Each assignment took something small and irreplaceable, roots she never planted, connections she never allowed to deepen. She had told herself for years that this was discipline. Lately she wasn't so sure. Why does silence feel louder when no one is questioning you anymore? The carrier deck was alive with motion when she arrived. Controlled chaos, hand signals cutting through engine noise, jets screaming into the sky. Sailors moved with practiced urgency, each action part of a rhythm too complex to explain and too precise to improvise. Anna walked through it unnoticed at first. That was her preference. Inside the operations center, the atmosphere changed. Conversations paused. Screens flickered with maps and waveforms. Officers turned as she entered, recognition flickering across their faces. Word traveled fast. She was introduced without embellishment. Title, role, authority established. No jokes this time, no skepticism. They wanted answers. Anna reviewed the data alone for hours. Signal logs stretched back days. Interference patterns overlapped in ways that suggested intelligence rather than brute force. Whoever, or whatever, was doing this understood anticipation. They weren't jamming signals outright. They were nudging them, delaying them just enough to erode trust. A subtle attack. She felt a strange flicker of admiration, not for the intent, but for the craftsmanship. This isn't random, she said finally during the briefing. It's probing, learning how you adapt. The room leaned toward her. They're watching how you react to uncertainty, she continued. If you panic, they escalate. If you overcorrect, they map your thresholds. What do we do? The carrier commander asked. Anna paused. She felt the weight of the room settle onto her shoulders. We remain predictable in discipline, she said, unpredictable in execution. It wasn't flashy advice. It rarely was. But it worked. Why does confidence from others make you confront doubts you thought you buried? Late that night, alone in her assigned quarters, Anna sat on the narrow bunk staring at the ceiling. The hum of the ship vibrated through the walls, constant and inescapable. It reminded her of the SCIF back at Fort Bridger. Different context, same isolation. Her console chimed softly. A message from Captain Ristova. Short, simple. You did more than correct behavior. You changed how people think. Don't underestimate that. Anna read it twice, then set the device aside. Changing how people thought had never been her objective. Objectives were measurable, clear. Human perception was not. She rolled onto her side, memories surfacing uninvited. Her first instructor, years ago, telling her she was technically brilliant but socially invisible, advising her, kindly, to speak louder if she wanted leadership roles. She hadn't spoken louder. She had learned to speak precisely. And now, somehow, that precision had forced others to listen. The realization unsettled her more than resistance ever had. Because being doubted was familiar. Being believed came with expectations she wasn't sure she wanted. Why does redemption feel incomplete when no one sees what it costs you? The next days blurred into work, adjustments, countermeasures layered delicately atop existing systems. Anna coordinated with cryptologic technicians, cyber specialists, drone operators. She slept in short intervals, ate when reminded. The interference lessened, then adapted, then faded. A quiet victory. On the third night she stood alone on the carrier's edge, the ocean stretching endlessly into darkness. The stars above were sharp, unforgiving points of light. She found them comforting. They didn't care who you were. They didn't misjudge. She thought about Drake and Rooker, not with anger but with distance. Their lives had shifted dramatically because of choices they'd made casually. She wondered if they understood yet, if they ever would. Consequences taught differently to different people. A breeze cut across the deck. Anna zipped her jacket and stayed where she was. She wasn't lonely exactly, but she was tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Why do some battles leave no visible scars and still change you forever? When the carrier group stabilized, formal recognition followed, commendations drafted, language polished. Phrases like exceptional performance and critical impact appeared on screens. Anna accepted them with the same calm she accepted everything else. During the final briefing, the commander addressed the room. What Chief Sharma demonstrated, he said, is that restraint is not passivity, it's control. Anna felt a faint tightening in her throat at the words. Control had always been her refuge. Afterward, as the room cleared, a young analyst lingered. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "How do you stay so steady when people doubt you when they cross lines?" Anna considered the question carefully. "I don't stay steady," she said at last. "I return to it." The analyst nodded slowly, absorbing that. Why does the future feel heavier when you know exactly who you are? That night, Anna opened her secure locker and reviewed her assignment's history. Bases, ships, conflict zones, a life measured in deployments and resolved incidents. She noticed something new. A pattern of correction. Everywhere she went, something misaligned had been forced back into place. Sometimes systems, sometimes people, sometimes herself. She closed the file and leaned back. Outside, the ocean rolled on, indifferent and immense. Anna understood then that her strength had never been about breaking things, or proving others wrong, or even surviving hostility. It had been about holding steady long enough for truth to surface, about absorbing pressure without losing shape. And as the ship cut through the dark, carrying her toward whatever waited next, she allowed herself one quiet thought, almost a hope. That one day, being underestimated wouldn't be a prerequisite for being understood. Until then, she would keep doing what she had always done. Listening, calculating, acting only when necessary. Because real power didn't announce itself. It endured. And endurance, she had learned, was the most demanding discipline of all. What happens when the noise finally fades, and you're left alone with the meaning of everything you survived? The ship cut through calm water as dawn broke, the horizon slowly bleeding color into the gray. Anna Sharma stood on the outer deck, hands resting on the cold railing, eyes fixed where sky met sea. Morning had always been her favorite time, not because it was peaceful, but because it was honest. Nothing pretended to be more than it was. Behind her, the carrier was already waking. Footsteps, voices, orders, systems coming online, life moving forward without ceremony. That, she thought, was the truest sign that things were working. Her assignment was technically complete. The interference had ceased. The unknown signal had vanished the way it had arrived, quietly, intelligently, without leaving fingerprints. Intelligence would analyze it for months. Briefings would be written, theories debated. Anna knew the truth would be less dramatic. Whoever had tested them had simply moved on. And so would she. Later that morning, she sat alone in a small conference room waiting for final debrief. The chair across from her was empty. No pressure, no urgency, just time. Enough time for reflection to sneak in. She thought about Fort Bridger again. Not the field, not the 7 seconds everyone would remember. The dining hall. The laughter. The moment she'd chosen not to react. That had been the real test. Anyone could respond to open aggression. Anyone could fight back when given permission by circumstance. But restraint, true restraint, required something far rarer than strength. It required faith. Faith that truth didn't need performance. Faith that systems, when properly documented and confronted, could correct themselves. Faith that dignity could survive being ignored. She hadn't always had that faith. Years ago, earlier in her career, she had tried to speak louder, tried to adapt her posture, her tone, her presence to fit expectations that weren't designed with her in mind. She remembered the exhaustion of that phase, the quiet resentment, the creeping fear that no matter how competent she became, it would never be enough. What saved her then wasn't recognition. It was clarity. The realization that she didn't need to be visible to be effective. She needed to be precise, consistent, impossible to dismiss once the data spoke. She had built her life around that principle. And it had held. The door opened. The carrier commander entered, older than most men in the room by habit rather than age. He sat across from her and reviewed the final report in silence. When he looked up, his expression was thoughtful. "You know," he said, "most people think leadership looks like presence, commanding a room, being unmistakable." Anna waited. "I'm starting to think it looks more like what you do," he continued, "creating conditions where others can't afford to lie to themselves." She inclined her head slightly. "That's usually when change lasts." He nodded. "Your next orders will come through soon. Until then, you're free to stand down." Stand down. The phrase sounded foreign. She thanked him, rose, and left the room. Freedom, she had learned, was relative. That evening, as the ship prepared to return to port, Anna packed slowly, methodically. She folded each item with care, returning her space to neutrality. Temporary lives demanded clean exits. Before closing her bag, she paused. Inside was the ranger patch. She hadn't sewn it on, hadn't displayed it. It had stayed with her quietly, a symbol not of belonging, but of acknowledgement. She turned it over in her fingers once, then placed it back inside. Some things didn't need to be shown to be carried. As the ship docked and the first lines were secured, Anna walked down the gangway among dozens of others. No one stared this time. No whispers followed her. She was just another figure moving forward. She preferred it that way. Outside the gate, the world felt wider, less structured, harder to predict. Her phone vibrated. New orders. Another location. Another system under strain. Another environment where assumptions would need correcting. She read the message, then locked the screen. For a moment, she stood still, letting the weight of it settle. She wasn't naive enough to believe the world had changed. There would be other dining halls, other jokes, other moments where silence would be mistaken for weakness, other people convinced that volume equaled value. But she no longer felt the need to brace herself against those moments. She had learned something essential, that her worth was not reactive. It was inherent, and it did not diminish when unrecognized. As she stepped forward, blending into the flow of people and traffic and ordinary life, Anna felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Hope. Not the fragile kind that depended on outcomes. The durable kind, built on evidence, on lived experience, on the knowledge that systems, like people, could be corrected if someone was willing to endure the discomfort long enough to expose the flaw. She knew she would continue to be tested. She knew restraint would continue to cost her more than aggression ever could. But she also knew this. Strength did not always announce itself with force. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it documented. Sometimes it absorbed insult without surrendering identity. And when it finally acted, it did so with such clarity that no argument could survive it. Anna Sharma walked on, unremarkable to the passing eye. But the spaces she left behind were quieter, stronger, more honest, and somewhere, in places she would never return to, people would pause before underestimating the next quiet figure in the room. Because they had learned, perhaps too late but not too late to matter, that dignity doesn't beg for recognition. It doesn't shout. It doesn't perform. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.